All right, welcome to the Strength of Knowledge podcast. I'm Marshall Bennett. Today we are going to be talking about when do we start training athletes that are doing different sports differently. Not really sport specific training or anything along those lines. We'll kind of dive into that as well. But to lead us off, like always, is Aaron.
So now, Marshall, I know you're talking about elite athletes, but I don't have elite athletes. I'm at the high school level, so I have a lot of sports, a
Wow,
lot of
shots fired.
teams. Um, I'm just not lucky and blessed to have the technology like you with all that gifts. What you mentioned about last episode. Um, I guess what I'll go ahead and say it's been different every place I've been. I very rarely been at an only football place. I think it was only when I was at Buffalo. I only worked with football. Every other place I worked with multiple different teams. I've had my multiple different teams. I have now at the high school level. I have every high school sport and the high school, and it's just me in the weight room. So kind of where I go very general right off the bat, no matter who it is, no matter if I have the elite athletes like Marshall Bennett or if I have high school athletes like we did at Pella Marshall Bennett. Um, we very rarely went into a complex movement. I will say I go very general of saying a lot of my things are very similar no matter what sport because at the high school level, if I get them stronger, move better, and we sprint and jump, they're hopefully it translate into a better athlete. Not always the case, but most of the time you get them stronger, you get them to move better, you get them to jump, you get them to sprint regularly and consistently. Most of the time that translate into a better whatever sport. Like you said, the sport specific, very rarely, if you even consider that what I do, I'll throw some tweaks in. I guess what I call sport specific is, let's say it's football and it's a wrestler. I'll do more upper back, more neck work, but it's instead of doing like an IY and T, I'll throw in like neck bridges or neck push-ups like we did in the high school. It's just that little tweaks and it's not really in the program. It's kind of just me on the fly of saying, hey, remember football wrestlers do this because I keep it, like I said, I'm very general. I keep a lot of my teams the same. And right now, if you look at my program, the only thing is different is I separate them from off season to in season. Like I mentioned before, my off season are doing a 5-3-1 program. My in season are doing undulating. So I just use a relative intensity and I go, what do I go? I think I went medium to low intensity to high, not high intensity, but the medium to high intensity back to low, then back, and then like high week. So I only do like a high intensity week once a month with my in season athletes, and I keep them with the volume low. And really, a lot of times now I'm kind of going in just meat and potatoes because it's kind of going with my basketball teams. They're getting a longer season and they're getting a lot of games right off the bat because a lot of the games they had were canceled, so they're rescheduling. So they're having a lot of games right now. Sometimes I think at one point it was like 10 days they had 7 games. So a lot of times I'm just getting the meat potatoes, and it's just we come in, we front squat, we do a press, we do a pull, and we get out. Next day we do a press, we do a bench press, we do a pull, and we do like a Nordic curl for the hamstring. Um, but going back off, if I ever go back to a college setting, and I have my own team, I'll go ahead and give the example SIU for my baseball team. Obviously, we did more arm care stuff than what I had my women's soccer did. I had women's soccer do some neck. I had my baseball team do jump shrugs instead of cleans. Had them do an option of high pulls too. Then going back to women's soccer, we front squad, where my SIU baseball team, we had front squat and back squats. It was kind of different at the college setting because I was able to have those tweaks and different, um, I guess, different ideas to be able to like, okay, baseball, maybe a little more, like I said, arm care, and I can eliminate some of those exercises. Like obviously we didn't do any overhead press. We still had a landmine, even though that's not technically overhead press. We did some more upper back work. We did some triceps for some elbow health, where in Soccer, like I said, a lot of them were freshmen. So we came in, I did a lot of hamstrings and some VMO like heel elevated. We had the wedges. So we did a lot of goblet squats, heel elevated to get the knee over the toe. And it just kind of different at the college level because I was able to have those tweaks. Or now at the high school setting, it's mostly all athletes do the very similar general program. I would love to have the tweaks, but right now to keep it as easy as I can. Eventually, I know I mentioned to you guys I might get Team Builder very soon. If I ever have that available, I might be able to program a little easier on myself and not use what I'm using right now. And it'll be a little easier to do a little more tweaks, a little more individual, maybe do a team by team. But at the end of the day, it's very general because I'll have an athlete who's a 3-sport athlete who doesn't really have a true off season. So I got to get a lot of the meat and potatoes through the entire year and try not to kill them, even though they're still high school players. They are like Energizer bunnies. It's very rarely what they take days off or anything just because that's how they are. So that's kind of how I go, changing my athletes from different programs to different programs. I'm a very general guy for the setting I am, but if I ever go back to college or like you, Marshall Bennett, private sector, you might be able to do a little more specific with that type of athlete, but you keep it very general at Tippecanoe Valley.
Shout out to those high school kids. I mean, there's probably some elite kids within that group, and you're just, you're just doubting them. A strength coach, you should be positive and you should be uplifting. But hey, maybe next year. Sam, what do you think?
Maybe next year. Well, I'm similar in the way that what Aaron said about how to do it. I kind of break it up into training athletes from different sports differently in a couple different ways, where I break it up into the actual programming, what exercise selection, stuff like that, and then kind of the way that I coach them. For programming, it's, I would say, 95 to 98% of all of my programming, like Aaron, it's meat and potatoes. It's still development, and you're never getting sport specific in the weight room, but you always have to ask yourself, what are the demands that the sport is putting on your athletes' bodies? And so you can either kind of take a couple different options or a couple different paths for that. You can go with strengthening the areas that are going to be a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more open to injury from the sport just naturally, or you could increase kind of the body's ability to do some of the things that sport mainly covers. Like, I'll bring wrestling back into it since Aaron did. Kind of the difference between like a wrestler and like a volleyball player or something, where they both need to be able to have a high repeatability for 90+% throughout their entire match, because obviously volleyball, you're going to be jumping tons of times during a match, during practice, stuff like that. And wrestling, you just don't really get a break, but you're going to have high bursts of energy, and you're going to have to kind of like manipulate someone else's body at the same time. So it's going to be different, whereas there are similarities where they both need to be able to produce 90% or more on a consistent basis throughout the entire match. But then the difference is the different kind of aspects that the sport puts stress on their body in that way is like how volleyball, you're going to have a few seconds of rest in between each point, in between each set, stuff like that. And when you're rotating, maybe you're going into a different position, maybe you're rotating out, you're coming back in, something like that. So you're going to have a little bit different rest times. And so that can sometimes play into how you program for them. It depends, because sometimes you might want to go on the side of time sets versus reps, or however you might want to do it, just to keep their bodies in that same kind of performance mode, where it's still not sport specific. You're still working on the general qualities, but within the time frame of that sport gives. Like they say, whatever football, the average football play is like 6 seconds, and then you get like 30 seconds rest between plays, something like that. But then there are the big differences between volleyball and wrestling, where it's like volleyball, it's way more calisthenic in the way that wrestling is also calisthenic, but volleyball, it's you jumping as many times as you need to be able to actually perform that. You're going to be hitting the ball. It's a little bit lighter ball than other sports. You're going to be doing that over and over throughout a match, maybe sometimes throughout each volley or each point, where you might not get enough rest to be able to actually get 90% or more out of every single jump or every single hit or something like that. But you have to kind of try to train into getting that adaptation. While wrestling, you're going to have a whole lot shorter of a match, where I think college, it's at most 7 minutes, maybe, without overtime, something like that. I don't know, but
Or ask D Train.
What?
Or ask D Train.
Or ask D
Or have Marshall ask him, since they're tight.
Yeah, but
Your best
it's the different kind of times where it's like every athlete in every sport is going to have to be able to give maximal energy at like repeated throughout their entire sport. But it's just wrestling, you're not going to get nearly as much rest as in like volleyball, where volleyball, you're going to have each point. Wrestling, whistle blows, you go for 2 minutes unless you go out of the circle or something like that, but you're going, and you might have kind of an ebb and flow of, where you might be pushing, pulling, stuff like that. It gets into a little bit more technique stuff, whatever like that, where you're trying to manipulate someone else's body. And so you have to be able to have kind of that overall a little bit more GPP style percentage, I would say. But then you also have to be able to ramp it up fast to be able to make quick moves and to be able to show off that strength in a fast way to be able to take advantage of your opponent and score points. So it's like just being able to see the differences between sports in that way, and seeing how the sport stresses their bodies differently, and training that different kind of stressor, I think. And that kind of gets into kind of how I see like coaching different sports. Obviously, each team, like in the same sport, if you have two different teams, they're going to have a completely different kind of culture that I think is set by the team itself, by like the athletes on the team. They're going to be the ones really setting it, because they're the ones playing it. They're the ones spending all day, all of their time together. And so you're going to have to kind of influence that in your own way, or kind of work with that in your own way, where you're not going to be as intense. Maybe your football team really likes listening to Metallica, but your baseball team likes listening to rap or something. And so it's kind of just a different feel. The whole vibe of the training sessions are going to be different. So you can't really coach them differently. You can have those side conversations where you can come, like bring them off to the side and say, technique wise, this is what you have to work on, everything like that. But it's like the whole kind of environment is going to be a little bit different from team to team. So yes, I coach different sport teams differently, but generally I would say about 95-98% of everything is about the exact same. Good.
Hit him some knowledge, Marshall Bennett.
I think, there's strength coaches that talk about like the 10%, 15% rule of what actual sport specific training that we actually do. But I think Sam really mentioned like the key part is in the weight room, you're not really doing anything that's going to be sport specific. And, when I think about it, like if we're training a football team and we are training a cross country team, cross country is probably going to need more higher endurance, muscle groups just for their sport in general, but they're going to get that a lot through running, because they're going to be doing, 3 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles, whatever they're going to do, whatever their coach wants them to do. But realistically, they're still going to do, 3 rep maxes. We're going to get percentages on them. We're going to train them just like you would train a football team. Personally, I'm not saying like everyone is going to do that or everyone should do that, but the big thing that I think about is, Sam mentioned it too, is what sport has these what sport has these like stress factors that we have to accommodate for and kind of think about and program around and kind of focus on for each sport. Something like a concussion, right? So any contact sport we want to prevent concussions. We're going to train neck and stuff like that. But, what about baseball? Do you think baseball players shouldn't train neck and only football players should? I don't think that is necessarily true either. So I think, you can always make an argument that, this team really needs this and this team doesn't really need this as much. But I think throughout all sports, you're generally going to train them a lot of the same way. You're going to push, you're going to pull, you're going to be jumping, running, cutting, you're going to do all the same things. So I think the first thing I think about is it a linear or a lateral sport? So something like tennis, really focusing on, changing your direction laterally, moving quick laterally, staying low to the ground and doing some linear speed because they're still going to crash towards the net. But something like, basketball, football, where you're doing more sprints and going more linear, but you're also doing lateral change of direction stuff. That's the first thing that I think about when we're talking about different sports, and then everyone's going to jump and land, right? So we have to talk about landing mechanisms, jumping mechanisms, running mechanics, all that is going to be the same across the board. I think the weird one that I kind of think about is like track, right? You don't generally take track athletes like sprinters to the turf and teach them running mechanics because that's going to be more sport specific to what the coach is going to do with them. So you don't necessarily need to do that as a strength coach. Again, just my opinion. I don't think that has to be everybody's opinion, but and then going in the weight room, personally, I'm going to go unilateral, focus on some asymmetries, and then work towards bilateral movements. Like Aaron talked about, me being in the private sector, having the testing equipment that we have, I'll have more individual results, knowing what specific asymmetries each athlete's going to have, so we can kind of formulate a plan around that. But we do test out teams. Like today, we had a 65 girl lacrosse team come in, and we tested all of them, and we had a general idea of the asymmetries that they all have across the board. And it's a little bit harder in a team setting to kind of individualize each athlete and kind of make their own program, each and every one. And, it depends on space, depends on equipment, depends on staff and all those across the board. So one of the big ones, where I work at, I'm the coordinator for the internship. So I run the internship where I work. And, last semester, two of the interns actually had a pretty big conversation about how they thought that we should do in performance some sport specific training. So like if we were outside and say it was one argument was say it was a soccer player. When you're a soccer player and you're running and playing soccer with and without the ball, it's going to be two different movements, right? And, obviously the kid is right making that argument, but he thinks that we should train with and without a soccer ball. So you're kind of teaching them better mechanics, better movement qualities with their specific sport. And that's where I think the argument stops because, that's why we have sport specific coaches. Soccer coaches are going to teach you what you should be doing with and without the soccer ball. We're going to teach you how to run better, move better, cut better, decelerate better, all those things across the board. And like little lacrosse coach today, she wants us to give them like the last 10 minutes of competition time where they're doing something with their sticks in their hands, but we can still have them do like competition figure eights, or we can have them do mirror drills or something like that, where they're doing change of direction and doing kind of stuff like that. And I think that's like the biggest issue we see in our field is we can only do so much as strength and conditioning coaches, right? We're always going to be an accessory to the sport coaches, and we have to listen and kind of accommodate what the coach wants to do with their team, because evidently it's their team, right? So even though I don't think we need to do something with a lacrosse stick in their hand, it's something that we have to do because the coach wants to do it, right?
I do like that too, that's the most that she asked for. Like you can do your speed work and stuff as long as they have like their stick. Like that's one of the most kind of like passive sport specific type things that's one of the most, I don't know. I love that that was the most that she asked.
Right. And I mean, you guys both know how much a coach can ask for, right? I mean, they'll try to take as much as they can. It's in this game that we play with coaches, it's always about give and take. And I mean, Aaron knows that, when we were in the high school sector, the head football coach probably didn't see eye to eye right away. And he went straight to Aaron because Aaron was just, yes, man, giving him everything that he wanted to do. And I was kind of being resistant, not because we didn't want to use his maxes, right? I didn't see what they squatted. We wanted to re-squat them, so we had actual numbers that we saw. He didn't jive with that, moving forward. You're going to run into that sort of thing with coaches all the time. Like they want things done their way because, it's happened in the past and, you don't really need to change things now or whatever. So I think that's the biggest problem when I think about sport specific. But, when you learn about sports and you talk to other, I got to say physio because I'm talking to a cricket athlete, right? So I don't know much about cricket. So I have to do my own research to try to understand the sport better, the demands like Sam talked about. And right now, the cricket player that I'm working with, his physio from India is out here with him. So I get to talk to him and have a better understanding about the demands and kind of what injuries they see. I mean, obviously, it's going to be kind of similar to baseball, but it's a lot of different outcomes and injuries and whatever. Because one of the biggest things that they have is dislocations of the finger because they play without gloves, right? They have to catch everything barehanded. It could be a freaking 100-mile-an-hour ball to come right at you and they just catch it with their hand. Like that's pretty insane. But one of the most common things that they work on is external rotation of the shoulder. They have a lot of issues externally. They are a little bit weaker than if they were an internal athlete. So understanding and trying to learn the demands of the sport and talking to the athlete, I think is pretty important too. Cause again, like I don't know much about cricket, but like this athlete that I'm working with, he plays outfield, he pitches, he hits. Like it's nothing like baseball in that sense. Cause you usually have, one specific sport or one specific position that they are in that you kind of focus on, like a first baseman or a pitcher or a catcher, vice versa, whatever. If you're a really good cricket athlete, you're playing all over the place. So I think you guys really nailed it on the head with this, talking about sports specific thing. I think the big one is, what sports specific demands do coaches ask for you, and what do you think is like too much, and where do you kind of draw the line and say, this is something that you should do as a coach, and I'll focus more on this.
Yeah, I like that too, because like there are some things that I will, for the most part, unless they like really push for me to do something like that, like in the past, I've had a volleyball coach ask me to jump or like have their team jump a lot, like throughout the whole year, in season, off season. And I tried to kind of get away from that because I'm not trying to teach someone how, or someone who's good at jump, whatever. I think it can get up to something like crazy, like 90 jumps in one session. I'm not going to teach that person how to jump in season, because then if they get onto the court and then they start trying to think about how I taught them how to jump or how I taught them how to land, and then they get like kind of out of that groove, then that can open them up to more injuries. Where it's like there are some things where it's like it can be a certain demand of their sport, where it's like in the off season, yeah, I'll jump them because it's important to learn kind of proper mechanics and generally how the body moves. But then it's like when they get in season, I don't want to touch it because it can do more harm than good if you focus too much on something that they get too dependent on, and then shit can go sideways. And that's or specific movements that coaches want. I in the past I've had a track coach ask me to do more Olympic lifts or more cleans specifically because they thought that the triple extension that you're looking for on the clean would transfer directly over into for sprinters or for throwers or whatever. And I had to kind of explain like there's some science out there that says when you're, even out of the blocks or something, sprinters may or probably won't get triple extension. And yes, it's still kind of an explosive movement, but it's still kind of that whole thing where it's kind of a misconception where they may ask for something. And if you have kind of that background or if you have that science on it, you can kind of like show them, hey, that's kind of a misconception. Let's try to focus on this because this will actually get them further to the point where we want to get them to. Where it's like it's being able to say no at the right times also, where we have to know what to do differently, but we also have to know what not to do with specific sports also.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and go off Sam. It just comes down to communication, especially with a sports coach. Of, as you mentioned, let's say if you wanted cleans, it just comes down to that communication of, you want that triple extension, but maybe we go a jump shrug or a trap bar jump or whatever, some type of jump. Then that's how you communicate of, here, steer coach, you're still getting that triple extension. It's just we're just eliminating that catch, which unfortunately I think is very hard for a lot of athletes to get in that front rack position. So I think it just comes down to that communication, and it just comes down to that trust. It's very hard for a sports coach, especially if you're only there for 1 or 2 years. It's hard for them to trust you because they see a different guy, and the other guy told them, oh yeah, we always clean. So it's very tough to build trust. And as I mentioned, it just comes down to that communication of, especially like conditioning wise, of just energy systems, of understanding if they want to do some long runs, but that might not be the best situation for whatever sport that is, just breaking down the energy systems, telling them, hey, I don't see 300-yard repeats, 400-meter repeats, or half-mile repeats, or whatever it is going to be good for a sprinter or whatever that athlete or sports you think is. So I think it all comes down to communication. That's a very hard part. No one wants it. It's a human nature to not necessarily have that communication, have that problem. It's something what's learning. Everyone's learning of the communication. It's also what Marshall said, that given the give and takes thing, that just takes experience, understanding, knowing that person of, hey, you want triple extension. I want athletes to be powerful and stronger. Let's meet in the middle. It's not always easier said. Sometimes that coach is stuck on that movement, and it just comes down to that communication, trying to educate them the best you can and trying to work it out.
Absolutely. Where that communication can also lead to into part of the education point of the job, where where the coach may ask for a triple extension because they think that it ties directly into their sport, but maybe you take them, or maybe you're already have that kind of thought process in mind when you're programming, where then you kind of haven't even seen like a single one of your programs, or they haven't seen like a training block that you've put together for the team or something. And it's probably good to kind of like print one off and bring it with you, or give it to the coach or something like that. Just be able to say, I understand that you're asking for X to be added into the program, but we're doing ABC to do that more efficiently. Right. So it's like, it is 100% that communication, just to be able to explain to them that maybe you're already doing something that's going to get them the outcome that they want. And they just don't really see it as clearly as you do when you're putting it together.
Yeah, one thing I was going to talk about was the one thing I kind of got introduced to last offseason was metabolic conditioning. And it's a little bit more sport specific, I would say, because, and I'm only talking about football. I haven't really branched down into other sports with it yet, but like we'll have, 10 plays that we do for just defensive linemen, or we'll have 10 plays that we do for DBs. And, it could be a 5-yard sprint into a 10-yard back pedal, right? And that's one play. They jog back over. We give them another play. Let's just say it's a 10-yard sprint. They come back over. They do a figure eight, something like that, right? I'm just kind of spitting ball and just routes right now, but we would do that for 10 plays, give them like a minute and a half recovery. So we're kind of mimicking, 4 and out or something like that. We're on the field, just working. This is towards the end of it where they're kind of going back into mini camp and back into August for their sport. But that way we can kind of get them into a higher demand of their energy system development that we're looking for. And then they get back into their sport. And then the other thing is, we talk about it all the time as strength coaches, being a chameleon, right? We got to adapt to whatever comes our way. And I think the big one would be, you can have a coach that says, I don't want my athletes to do bench press. Okay. Then you go into push-ups and the coach can't say anything about, or the coach might be like, wow, I love this. This is way better. But evidently you're doing the exact same thing. So
How do you say that?
it always
dude?
works out that way.
I don't think I've ever had
Yeah.
a coach say, let's do push-ups. So,
No, I said a coach said
They're really
"I want them
really
to do
pushing
bench
for the
press,"
push-up.
and then you
oh, they're really
make a
pushing.
push-up.
You can also use that as an educational opportunity to
Yeah.
say, well, the relative intensity of a bench press has more opportunity to be lower, thus is safer
Yeah.
than a push-up, depending on the athlete and their build and their weight.
Yeah.
Where you might
You
be
see
able
that
to get more
freshman who's
volume
really
out of the
weak,
bench
he can't
press
do a
and work
push-up.
into a push-up.
I'm just talking about a coach that I know that had a group of swimmers, and their coach didn't want them to do bench press, so he had them do push-ups instead. And it was the same horizontal press that he wanted to get done, and the coach didn't hate
It
it.
was not the same. A push-up is not a barbell bench press, Marshall Bennett.
I said horizontal press. Is it a horizontal press?
It's a little bit.
You
I
said
mean,
the same.
there are different,
Oh, the mic
different
drop.
aspects to it. There's different muscular activation between
Marshall,
the
you
two,
got to
and
bench at
one
least
can
200
actually.
pounds. Talk about the bench press.
All I said was horizontal press. I think you guys are getting bent out of shape about this right now.
Well, I mean,
it's not a
pretty
big.
specific
Yeah.
horizontal presses.
Yeah, you need to get off that horizontal, vertical stuff. Even John called you out that one day when you were saying I had the guy do an inverted row instead of a chin up. You're like, well, it's not a vertical pull. It's a pull. A pull is a pull, Marshall. A press is a press.
I mean, there's a difference.
I think you would be learning since 2.5 years ago, but you still thick-skulled here. It honestly just makes me sad.
Yeah,
That's why we started this thing, for Aaron to teach
your
Marshall what
education.
better to.
Me and Sam are great. I don't know about you, Mel.
Oh, you're great, huh? Great.
Yeah, I got a lot of time for educating myself.
Elite.
A lot of time.
Interesting.
Elite. Just like my Fortnite skills. Elite.
Catch me on the sticks.
Catch us next week when we're live streaming Fortnite for 4 hours.
Yeah. Marshall, you want to thank our fans like you usually do?
Oh, thanks everybody for tuning in this week. This was a great topic to talk about on Strength and Knowledge. Please keep the comments coming. Let us know how we're doing, things we can improve, and thank you guys for your time.